welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling something that's, pretty complex, I think, the philosophy of memory. You've sent in some excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and let me tell you, this stuff is dense. It really makes you think about, like, what memory, even IS. Luckily, we have expert speaker here to help us kind of break it all down, so ready to dive into some deep thoughts.
Absolutely. Memory might seem simple at first glance. You remember your birthday, you know where you live, but the more you think about it, the more philosophical questions pop up.
Right, it's like a rabbit hole. So the first thing that jumped out at me from these readings is how many different types of memory there are. It's not just one thing, is it?
No, not at all. Even early philosophers like Bergson and Russell were already talking about this. They distinguished between habit memory, which is more about automatic actions and skills, and then recollective memory, where you consciously remember specific events. Today, we use terms like declarative and non-declarative to make that distinction.
So declarative is like stuff we can actually talk about, facts, events, all that. And non-declarative is more those unconscious skills like riding a bike or, playing an instrument. But we're focusing on a specific type of declarative memory for this deep dive, right?
Exactly. We're going to be zeroing in on episodic memory, which is all about remembering personal experiences. It's your unique window into your own past. And philosophically, it's the one that raises the most questions, I think.
Yeah, because how do we even know if an episodic memory is actually real? I mean, how do we know it's not just like general knowledge or something we imagine, like remembering a trip to Rome versus knowing that Rome is the capital of Italy?
Yeah.
Those are different, right?
Absolutely. Philosophers have been trying to define that special episodicness for ages. One approach is what they call the what, where, when criteria. If a memory has a specific thing in a specific place at a specific time, then it's considered episodic.
But that seems a little too simple, don't you think? It doesn't really capture that feeling of actually reliving the experience, like knowing that it happened to you.
You're right, that's a key point. The what, where, when idea, while helpful, doesn't really get at the core of what makes episodic memory so unique. So another approach focuses on what's called self-reflexive content. So it's not just about the event itself, but about you being aware that you were remembering it.
Okay, so it's like a memory within a memory. It's not just remembering your graduation, but also remembering how proud you felt during the ceremony.
Exactly. And then there's another layer to this whole puzzle, which is where phenomenology comes in. This is about the subjective experience of remembering, that distinct feeling of the past coming alive in your mind. Endel Tolding, a memory researcher, called this autonoetic consciousness. This means, like, the awareness that you are the one who experienced what you're remembering.
Oh, okay. I have a really vivid memory that might help explain this. When I was about 5 years old, I was totally convinced I could fly. And I jumped off this playhouse in our backyard and, well, gravity won, let's just say. But I can still remember that feeling of certainty, the wind, everything. Would that count as episodic based on these criteria?
It sounds like it fits the bill. You have a specific event, you know it's your memory, and there's that strong feeling of actually reliving it. What's interesting is that this actually ties into debates about animal memory. Some researchers believe that animals might be sort of stuck in time. Like, they can't consciously re-experience their past the way humans can.
Wow, that's interesting. But okay, let's say I'm remembering this whole flying debacle. How do we know I'm not just imagining it really, really well? It seems like the line between memory and imagination can be pretty blurry.
That is the I question, isn't it? How do we know what makes a memory real? Philosophers call this the problem of mnemicity. To try to answer this, they've come up with the idea of memory markers, things that distinguish remembering from imagining.
So are these markers things like how vivid or detailed the memory is?
Yeah.
Because I've had false memories that felt so real. I once described a whole movie plot to someone, convinced I'd seen it as a kid. Turned out I just read about it in magazines. So embarrassing.
That's a perfect example of what's called the source problem, figuring out where the information in a memory actually came from. Vividness can be a marker, but as you've experienced, it's not always reliable. And philosophers talk about different types of markers. There are first-person markers, which are the things you personally use to judge a memory, like that vividness or feeling of familiarity. And then there are third-person markers, which are more like objective criteria that theorists use.
So a third-person marker would be like actual proof that the event happened, like a photo or a witness who backs up your story.
Exactly. Or things like whether the memory makes sense based on how the world works. Like if you remember flying like a bird, it's probably safe to say that's not a real memory. But even with all these markers, it can be surprisingly tough to tell real memories from imagined ones.
And to complicate things even further, what about remembering stuff that hasn't happened yet? Like planning for the future or imagining different outcomes to past events. Isn't that using the same mental processes as remembering?
That's the process problem. And yeah, there's a lot of overlap between remembering the past, imagining the future, and even what if, thinking about things that could have been. Some philosophers think we use different markers to sort these out. For example, that feeling of pastness you mentioned earlier could be key for genuine memories. And the fact that you're intending to imagine something could be a marker for imagination.
Oh, my brain hurts. So, how do philosophers actually explain how remembering works? Like the actual process? What's going on in our minds when we remember something?
That's where we get into the big theories of memory. You can think of it as preservationism versus generationism. Preservationists see memory as kind of a storage vault. Information gets in there, gets stored, and then gets retrieved, pretty much unchanged. But generationists emphasize construction memories are built, and sometimes inaccurately, from bits and pieces of experience.
So, preservationism is like that memory palace thing, where you create this mental space to store information. But generationism is more like our memories are constantly being edited and remixed, like our minds are little movie editors, putting together a story from bits of the past.
That's a great analogy. And within those broad categories, there are even more specific theories about how remembering works. We'll dig into those next time and see how philosophers try to explain this incredible ability of our minds. Welcome back to our deep dive into the philosophy of memory. Before we went down that rabbit hole of different theories, we were talking about how memory isn't just like a perfect recording of the past, right?
Yeah.
And it gets even trickier when we start talking about how memories actually represent what happened.
Representation. So like how our memories stand in for the events themselves. It's like how a photograph represents a scene, but it's not the actual scene.
Exactly. And just like with photographs, different philosophical views have different ideas about how memory representation works. One big debate is between what's called direct realism and indirect realism.
Okay, I'm all ears. Direct realism. I'm guessing that's kind of like those theories that see memory as a direct window to the past. We're actually experiencing the past event, not just a copy of it.
That's the idea behind direct realism, yeah. It's appealing because it avoids the need for any kind of middleman, like those representations. It's like saying when you remember your trip to Rome, you're directly connected to that experience. But
Wait, but if that's true, then how do we explain false memories? If we're directly accessing the past, how can it be wrong? Seems like a big problem.
you got it. Just like with perception, we can hallucinate the possibility of false memories, or what are called confabulations, really throws a wrench in the whole direct realism thing.
Confabulations being those false memories that feel totally real.
Yeah.
So if direct realism doesn't really work, what about indirect realism?
Well, indirect realism tries to address that problem. It says that what we remember is actually an internal representation of the event, not the event itself.
So it's like our minds create these internal copies, like mental videos or files, and those are what we access when we remember. So our memories are always one step removed from what actually happened.
That's the gist of it, yeah. And it explains how memories can be inaccurate. The representation itself might be messed up, distorted, or just incomplete. But even indirect realism runs into problems. It can lead to a view called disjunctivism, which is a whole other can of worms.
Disjunctivism sounds intimidating. What's the issue there?
Disjunctivism about memory basically says that genuine remembering and confabulation are completely different types of mental states, like totally separate.
So a true memory and a false memory are like products of two different factories in your brain. One makes true memories, the other makes false ones. That seems a little far-fetched.
Yeah, and from a cognitive science standpoint, it's tough to make sense of. The processes that create both true and false memories are probably very similar, so this strict separation that disjunctivism proposes is hard to swallow. It seems more likely that it's a spectrum, not a clear-cut division.
Okay, so if direct realism and indirect realism both have issues, is there any middle ground?
Some philosophers have tried to find one, yeah. They argue that even if memories involve representations, we can still be directly connected to the past event in some way. It's like saying, okay, there's a mental representation, but it's still rooted in my actual experience of the event.
So it's not an either situation. Maybe we need both the representation and the connection to the actual event to get the whole picture of how memory works.
I think that's a good way to look at it. And this whole discussion brings us to something we can't avoid talking about. Memory traces.
Ah, yes, those mysterious traces. The things that supposedly hold the information for our memories. Are they like little files in our brains? This part always feels so elusive.
I think we all feel that way. The nature of memory traces is a big debate. Some philosophers even say we shouldn't include them in memory theories at all. They argue that traces are more about the physical stuff, like the nuts and bolts of how the brain works, and not about what it actually means to remember.
So it's like saying that knowing how a computer stores data doesn't tell us what the data actually is. It's a different kind of explanation. But don't we kind of need to understand the brain stuff to figure out how memory actually works?
Right, and that's what others argue. They say that traces might actually be part of what we even mean by memory, not just some extra detail, but like essential to the concept itself.
Now, that is meta. So the debate about memory traces is also about what kind of explanation we're looking for. A purely conceptual one about the meaning of remembering, or one that's based on how the brain actually functions.
Yeah, that's a great point. But even if we say traces exist, their role is still unclear. Are they identical to the representations we have during perception? Or do they change and get re-encoded over time?
So is a memory trace like a faded copy of our experience? Or is it more dynamic, like constantly being reshaped as we access and rethink our memories?
Big questions, right? There's a view called content invariantism, which says the trace keeps the same content as the original perception. But then there's content variantism, which says that content can change over time.
Content variantism seems to make more sense given how messy our memories can be. It's not like they're perfect recordings. They're influenced by all sorts of things.
Mm.
But then how can we ever know if a memory is accurate?
There you go. You've landed on one of the biggest questions in the philosophy of memory accuracy. And it's a question that has real-world implications, as we'll see.
Accuracy meaning whether our memories actually match up to what happened. We all want to think our memories are reliable, but this is making me doubt everything.
It's a very human concern. And it turns out there are different ways to think about accuracy when it comes to memory. It's not just about a memory being true or false.
Really? So there's more to it than just getting the facts straight. What else is there?
Philosophers differentiate between truth in memory and authenticity. A memory can be true, meaning it accurately reflects the past event, but it can also be authentic, meaning it reflects your own personal experience, even if it's not perfectly accurate.
So you could have a memory that feels absolutely real to you, but that isn't actually how it happened. Whoa, that's trippy.
Exactly. Think about eyewitness testimony. Two people see the same event, but remember it differently. Their memories could both be authentic, reflecting their unique perspectives, but they might have different details and therefore not be completely accurate. It shows how much our subjective experience shapes our memories.
That makes sense. Our memories are colored by our perceptions, emotions, and all that. But if memories can be authentic without being totally true, can we ever trust them? Are we all just living in our own skewed versions of reality?
That's the question, isn't it? Some philosophers hold on to the idea of factivity of memory. They believe that genuine memories are always true, but from a more naturalistic perspective.
Naturalistic, meaning based on what we know about how the brain works, right? Like cognitive science and neuroscience.
Right. From that perspective, factivity is hard to defend. We know that memory is constructive, it involves interpretation and generation, so it makes sense that even genuine memories might have some inaccuracies. It's more about degrees of truth than absolute truth.
So it's not about a memory being 100% true or false, but about recognizing that there are levels of truth. A memory might be mostly accurate, but still have some gaps or distortions.
That's a good way to put it. And this is where the constructive, generative nature of memory becomes really important. It's not a bad thing. This ability to construct memories allows us to make meaning, connect things, and create a story of our lives. But it also means we need to be careful and think critically about our memories, not treat them like perfect recordings of the past.
This is making me rethink everything I thought I knew about my own memories. It's fascinating, but kind of unsettling. This brings us to another huge aspect of memory that's connected to all of this. Its relationship to the self.
Exactly. Memory isn't just about storing information. It's deeply tied to who we are as individuals. It shapes our identity, our beliefs about the world, even our sense of continuity over time. And this is where things get really interesting, philosophically speaking.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been exploring the philosophy of memory, and let me tell you, it's been a wild ride. We've talked about all sorts of things, like the different kinds of memories, how they represent the past, how accurate they are. But now, I think it's time to get to the big question. How does memory shape who we are?
That's where the idea of the self comes in, and it's a question that has puzzled philosophers for centuries, literally. One of the most famous ideas is the memory theory of personal identity, which goes all the way back to John Locke.
The memory theory. So basically, you're saying I'm the same person over time because I remember being that person. Like my memories are what create this continuous sense of self.
That's the basic idea. Locke argued that our memories of past experiences are what connect us to our past selves, what makes us the same person across time.
I can see how that makes sense, but doesn't that mean someone with like severe amnesia basically loses their sense of self? If their memories are gone, who are they? That seems like a big problem for this theory.
You've hit on one of the main challenges to the memory theory. Amnesia cases are really complicated. People with amnesia, even if they can't remember specific events, they often still have a sense of who they are, their values, their personality. So it suggests that there's more to the self than just episodic memory, those specific memories of events.
So maybe it's not just about those individual memories, but something bigger, like a sense of our personal history, our story, even if we don't remember every single detail.
That's where the idea of autobiographical memory comes in. It's more than just remembering specific episodes. It's about our whole life story, the narrative we create about who we are, where we came from, where we're going.
Ah, so it's like our own personal autobiography, right? With chapters and themes and all that. But wouldn't that still be based on our episodic memories? How can we have this bigger picture without those individual memories as building blocks?
That's a good point, and there are different views on this. Some researchers make a distinction between episodic and autobiographical memory, seeing the latter as this more complex system. It uses episodic memories, but also incorporates things like general knowledge about ourselves and others, our beliefs about our own personality, our goals, and so on.
So it's like more than just a photo album, right?
Yeah.
It's an ongoing story that we keep revising as we go through life, gathering new experiences, thinking about our past.
Exactly. There's a lot of emphasis on this idea of narrativity in autobiographical memory. Some theorists even say that creating this narrative is the main function of memory. It's how we make sense of ourselves over time, how we maintain this feeling of continuity even as things change.
Okay, that's fascinating.
Mm.
But does all of our autobiographical memory have to be based on actual events?
Yeah.
What about those like gut feelings we have about things, even if we can't pinpoint a specific memory that explains it? Are those part of our autobiographical memory too?
You're bringing up a really interesting point, and it leads us to a less conventional idea called Rilkean memory. It's named after the poet Rainer Maria Rilke, who wrote about these kinds of memories that are hard to put into words or images. They're more about feelings, sensations, and deep intuitions that stick with us, even if we've forgotten the actual events that shaped them.
Oh, I get it. It's like when a certain smell or sound triggers a strong emotion, even if you can't quite place the memory, it's almost like our bodies remember things our minds have forgotten.
Exactly. Rilkean memories might show up as physical habits, emotional reactions, or even those unexplainable feelings we have towards certain people or places. It suggests that our past is embedded in us on a deeper level, even if we can't always access those memories directly. It challenges that traditional view of memory as something purely in our heads, in our minds.
This is all so mind-blowing. But I think we have to talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to memory and the self-technology.
Yeah.
In today's world, so much of what we remember is actually stored on our devices or on the internet. Our phones remember our appointments. Our computers hold our photos and documents. The internet is this massive archive of information.
You're absolutely right. We live in the age of external memory, and it brings up a whole bunch of philosophical questions about what it even means to remember. Like, who are we when so much of what we know is actually outside of our own heads?
Yeah, exactly. It's like that saying, Google knows more about me than I do. But is it really memory if it's stored outside of our brains?
Mm.
Does using these external memory systems change the nature of memory itself?
And that's where the whole debate about extended cognition comes in. Some philosophers say our minds aren't limited to what's inside our skulls. They think our minds are literally extended by the tools and technologies we use. So in a way, our phones, computers, the internet, they become part of our thinking process.
Wow, so my phone isn't just a tool, it's part of my mind. That's a pretty wild idea. But it does feel like we're getting more and more reliant on these external systems. What happens to our own internal memory when we're constantly outsourcing it to technology? Like, do our brains get lazy?
That's a big question. Some people worry that relying too much on external memory will make our own cognitive skills weaker. Will we forget how to remember things on our own? Will we lose that ability to make connections and form our own identities? But others are more optimistic. They see it as a natural evolution of human intelligence. Maybe we're not losing memory abilities, but transforming them, adapting to a world where information is so readily available. It's a really interesting debate.
It does feel like we're entering a new phase of memory, right? This kind of partnership with technology. But there are also ethical concerns here, right? What about privacy, the right to be forgotten, the possibility of someone manipulating our memories if so much of our lives is stored externally?
Absolutely. Those are some of the biggest worries. When remembering becomes the default because everything is recorded and saved somewhere, it raises huge questions about control, autonomy, even the nature of truth. If our memories are so intertwined with these external systems, who owns those memories? Who gets to decide what we remember, what we forget? And in a world where information can be easily changed, how do we even know what's real anymore? These are questions we need to figure out as a society as we move further into this digital age.
It's not even just about individual memory anymore either, is it? There's also this whole idea of collective memory, how groups of people remember things together, like families, communities, or whole nations. Social media, online archives, all of that is changing how we share memories.
Exactly. Collective memory is a fascinating area where the boundaries between individual and shared memories start to blur. It raises questions about how these group memories are formed, how they shape our sense of self, both individually and as a group, and how they can be influenced by social and political forces. We're all part of this giant act of remembering and forgetting, and it's shaping our understanding of the past, present, and future in ways we're only beginning to understand.
Wow, we've gone from memory palaces to extended minds to collective remembering. This deep dive has been truly mind-blowing. Listener, what stands out to you from all of this? What are you taking away from our exploration of the philosophy of memory?
For me, it's realizing that memory isn't just about passively storing and retrieving information. It's this active, dynamic process that's constantly shaping who we are, how we see the world, even how we connect with each other. Memory is like a tapestry made up of individual threads, but it goes beyond ourselves, connecting us to other people, to our past, to the ongoing story of humanity.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Every memory, every time we remember something. It's not just about the past, it's also about the present and the future. And as we enter this new era of technology and change, I think understanding how memory works, both individually and collectively, is more important than ever. So, from the personal memories that shape our identities to the collective memories that bind us together, from the workings of our brains to the external memory systems we create, the philosophy of memory is a journey with no end in sight. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We hope you've come away with a new appreciation for the power and depth of memory. Keep those memories close, question everything, and never stop exploring the mysteries of your own mind.